Hi, I'm Mimi Geerges. Yemen has been engulfed in a war between Houthi rebels and a Saudi-led coalition. Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula is there, and the U.S. has recently ramped up involvement. But as usual, it's the civilians that suffer the most. It's American weapons. Is that acceptable to us as Americans? That these are being used against civilians?
The majority of Americans are not paying attention.
Welcome to the Mimi Geerges Show. Yemen was already the world's poorest Arab country 2 years ago, before this war started. The Houthis, which are a Shia militant group, rose up against their government and took over the capital. Saudi Arabia, Yemen's neighbor to the north, formed a coalition to defeat the Houthis and reinstall the president. The U.S. is part of that coalition, and we're also fighting Al-Qaeda, who are the same people that attacked the USS Cole back in 2000. My guest is Nabil Houthi, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, formerly the deputy chief of mission at the U.S. Embassy in Yemen. Nabil, welcome.
Thank you.
Why is the U.S. fighting in Yemen?
Primarily because of the presence of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, AQAP for short. The counterterrorism goal has remained a top priority, passed on from the previous administration. So the direct American action is only against Al-Qaeda. But the U.S. is also in alliance with Saudi Arabia.
So that's what I was going to ask you, because Al-Qaeda hates the Houthis, because one's Sunni and one's Shia, but we're fighting the Houthis with Saudi Arabia.
We're actually not fighting the Houthis.
Not directly?
Not directly. We are providing logistical and intelligence assistance to the Saudis. This was started by President Obama, and it was a giveaway to the Saudis, who were upset by the U.S. signing the Iran nuclear deal. So in order to give them something, Obama said, okay, we'll help you in your war in Yemen, but we won't get directly involved. And up until now, this is what the Trump administration is doing, unless it somehow turns around and decides to fight the Houthis directly. But up till now, we're only lending assistance. So we help the Saudis put up the naval blockade around Yemen, and we help their air operations logistically.
Targeting and things like that,
well,
intelligence.
Targeting may have stopped during the last days of the Obama administration. I'm not sure where it is right now, given that we have a new president.
What are America's strategic interests in Yemen?
Primarily, like I said, the presence of Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda Central virtually disappeared after the death of bin Laden. It turned into branches, and the branch of Al-Qaeda in Yemen is quite strong and quite capable of mounting international terrorist activities. And so the first goal is to try to eliminate Al-Qaeda in Yemen. Secondly, Yemen is in a strategic position, particularly at the entrance of the Red Sea, Bab el-Mandeb. Should a hostile power, say if Iran really assists a Houthi takeover, then Iran's guns would be at the entrance to the Red Sea, which would pose a strategic problem, since
because
Iran
millions
is also
of barrels of oil flow through that.
Yes, I mean, that's a strategic waterway for many reasons. Oil is only one of them.
You mentioned Iran. How much support are the Houthis getting from Iran?
Very little compared to what Saudi Arabia is providing the other side. Iran, contrary to what many have been saying, especially Saudis and other Gulfis, started out with zero interest and very little knowledge of the Houthis before 2010. At that time, the Houthis were fighting the former president Saleh. At the end of 2009, beginning of 10, the Saudis directly assisted Saleh, intervening with their air force and across the border. This is when Iran's ears pricked up, and they said, aha, you know, if the Saudis are interested, so there must be something for us on the other side of this struggle. So they quickly researched the Houthis and decided, although the Houthis are not Shia directly, they're cousins to the Shia.
It's a different branch of Shiism.
Yeah, and so they decided to politically support the Houthis. When the Houthis took over Sana'a, there were direct flights from Tehran to Sana'a, which presumably carried some supplies and weapons. But then when the war started, there was an air as well as a naval blockade, and it became very difficult for Iran to directly assist.
So is it correct to call them Iran-backed rebels?
I think it's an exaggeration. The backing is mostly political, symbolic. There's not too
Opportunistic,
much.
really.
Well, Iran and Saudi Arabia are competitors for power in the region. And so this is another arena, another opportunity for Iran to oppose Saudi influence. But given that Yemen is not a high priority for Iran, Syria is, Iraq is, Yemen is sort of added on as whatever energy and attention we have left we can bestow on the Houthis. But it is not a top priority for Iran.
Who is al-Qaeda fighting in Yemen?
Good question. Al-Qaeda is primarily fighting the Houthis, but there aren't many direct battles between the two. Al-Qaeda is trying to establish a foothold, a strong foothold. They tried to acquire territory and perhaps emulate ISIS.
Do they actually hold territory in Yemen?
They did briefly in Abyan. But then they were either defeated or there was some kind of an arrangement. And the United Arab Emirates troops went in and they exited Abyan. They're still in the region in southern Yemen, but they're no longer in control of anything they could build into a state.
What do the Houthis want?
The Houthis have evolved and their goals have changed over time. Originally, they rebelled against the Saleh, the former president's government, because of regional concerns as a region of Yemen. They felt that they were not getting anything out of this union. They were abused, neglected, and so they had demands on the central government. Reforms, more economic benefits, that sort of thing. When Saleh fell and President Hadi replaced him, there was a bit of chaos and a bit of a void. President Hadi did not quite fill the shoes of President Saleh, let's say. He just hasn't been as effective a leader. So the Houthis had certain demands on Hadi which they felt he did not meet. So they marched on the capital. They surrounded the capital for 3 weeks, perhaps a month, waiting to see if there would be a reaction. There was hardly a reaction from anybody. So they marched in and took the capital with very little resistance. So it was more sort of a goal. When they started out, they were asking for certain specific things, but their demands grew as they found an opportunity
and became more powerful.
And became more powerful in the process.
So their slogan is death to America, death to Israel, curse on the Jews, victory to Islam. I don't have any sympathy for them.
Well, from day one, President Saleh said to us, these people are supported by Iran. They're really against America. I'm fighting your war for you, so you must help me. And we said, well, give us a proof that Iran is helping them or that they are indeed against the US. All he could come up with is the slogan. The slogan is a bit old and tired and not really something it's a song they sing, but they've never...
But it does have meaning, Nabil. Come on, you can't stand up and say death to America and say, oh, it's meaningless.
Oh, sure you can. I mean, anybody can stand up and say that, and they have never taken any action against the US, neither in Yemen nor outside of Yemen. When they took over the capital, we decided to close the embassy, which I thought was an overreaction. So the ambassador and his staff left, and the embassy was pretty much in the hands of the Houthis to do with what they pleased. They have not done anything. They have not taken it over. ransacked it, nothing. The Houthis are also not a terrorist organization because they have never done anything outside of Yemen. Their goals have always been internal to
But have
Yemen.
they attacked civilians in Yemen?
Yes, I mean, they are involved in a civil war, essentially, and now in a regional war with Saudi Arabia bombing them. In the process, there have been human rights abuses, perhaps war crimes, by all sides involved in the war.
We're going to talk about that, but first I want to ask you about ISIS, because ISIS has been carrying out suicide bombing in Aden, which is Yemen's port city. Why and who is it against?
Well, ISIS started out with zero presence in Yemen. But when the war started and they saw AQAP taking over territory in the south of Yemen, they felt that it was an opportunity to extend the so-called Islamic Caliphate. And so ISIS sent a small force to Yemen, which started activities in the south, sometimes collaborating with Al-Qaeda, sometimes working against them at cross purposes. And the presence of ISIS in Yemen has remained small. Essentially, they're not really the same as their force in Iraq or in Syria, but they are capable of a car bomb here and there.
Yemen is such a poor country, even from before the conflict. Why? How did it get to be so poor? I assume they don't have any oil.
Actually, they have a little bit of oil, but I think it never amounted to that much, but it has dwindled down over time. I don't know, 300 barrels of oil a day or something.
But how did they get to be so poor, especially with Saudi Arabia being their northern neighbor, being so wealthy?
Well, that's a sensitive issue between Yemenis and Saudis and other Arabs in the Gulf. Over the years, money has been given by Saudis to Yemenis, but it was mostly loyalty, to buy loyalty. So money was given to President Saleh for years. Money was given to tribal leaders to gain their allegiance. But money was never used constructively to actually help Yemen develop. Yemen has a little bit of oil, but not enough. Most of the oil is taken up in corruption. Yemen is one of the most corrupt countries, as well as being one of the most poor countries. So what meager resources Yemen has had over the years have been taken up by corrupt leadership. They never quite developed export agriculture, for example. Historically, Yemen is the birthplace of coffee, but it was taken over by the production of ghat, which is a leaf that Yemenis like to chew, and it gives them a buzz.
Just kind of a narcotic.
It's a mild narcotic,
yeah.
But it's a quick cash crop. And so for poor Yemenis, it's something that they could year-round produce and make quick cash, which they then chew away because they chew their own product.
The Saudis have led a coalition against the Houthis. They're trying to defeat the Houthis, bring back the president. Are the Saudis, though, deliberately targeting civilians?
Well, it's hard to tell. I mean, whether they do it deliberately or they make gross mistakes.
But these are American missiles, aren't they? And don't they have better targeting ability than to hit, say, a funeral in Yemen that kills 100 civilians?
You have to remember that this is Saudi Arabia's first war. This is their first time out, so to speak. They have not had any experience in war before that. And so this is kind of a training for them. At the beginning of this war, a small group of American special forces experts were actually at the command and control center in Riyadh, and they were helping with targeting. But then because of recurring mistakes and because of international pressure on Saudi Arabia to stop this war against Yemenis, the US and the UK pulled out. So there's hardly any American presence right now in the command and control center in Riyadh. American assistance continues in other ways, but pretty much the Saudis feel like, okay, we have it now, we can do this on our own. And
yet it's still American war jets.
yes,
It's American weapons.
That the Saudis have bought.
That the Saudis have bought.
They own
but
them,
is
right.
that acceptable to us as Americans?
Well,
that these are being used against civilians, whether intentionally or not?
Yes, apparently it didn't bother the Obama administration very much, and it clearly is not bothering the Trump administration. The majority of Americans are not paying attention to Yemen that much. People like me who follow Yemen and who have lived and worked with Yemenis are appalled by what's happening to Yemen. We lobby, we try to present solutions. I've been for several years since leaving Yemen pleading with the US government, with the State Department, to put diplomacy first and to take a leadership role in bringing the parties of the conflict together. Before 2011 even, I said that, you know, we have to help keep the country together, because if Yemen disintegrates, it will be worse than Afghanistan. And then you would have to put troops on the ground just to prevent all the terrorism that would blossom.
But maybe partitioning would be a solution. Maybe the Houthis can have this area and the rest can have that area. Will that work?
I don't think so. I mean, the southern Yemenis have been calling for an independent southern Yemen, which they had after the British left. They had for a decade or two, and then they unified with the north. If you divide Yemen according to regions, it would probably end up being 5 Yemens and not just 2. But the Yemenis are so integrated, really, as a people. It would be an unnatural division, no matter how you slice it. And in the end, each region would be a problem, and you wouldn't really be solving it. I think international attention should be focused on keeping the country together, but that involves some hard negotiation and mediation, both between tribes as well as with political parties and factions, because the country has fragmented right now, and it's not easy to just say, okay, there's the Hadi government side and the Houthi side. No, it's more complicated.
The Saudis put in place a blockade meant to be an arms blockade, and you said that we helped with that. However, that has caused widespread famine. The UN is saying that 17 million people are under threat of famine. I read somewhere that it was almost 8 million at risk of starvation. I mean, these are huge numbers. There's
Right.
only 25 million in Yemen, the whole population.
Right.
I mean, I don't know, 10,000 people have died, 1,500 of them are children, 2.2 million children at risk of acute malnutrition. This is a real disaster.
Yes, I mean, the numbers are staggering, and especially when you consider that Yemen was on the edge anyway because of its poverty. There are mountainous regions and villages in Yemen where there's difficult access to cities and to services such as clinics, schools, water. Water is now in many places in Yemen, you have to drill perhaps 1,000 meters down in the ground to reach water. Where they have water, the kids, usually little girls, have to go down and fill jugs of water and walk it up the hill to have water in their homes. When the situation becomes worse, where they can't have access to anything anymore because of the war, medicine, for example, is very hard to come by right now. A, it's not entering the country in any numbers, and B, to move it from cities to rural areas is very difficult.
Because of the war.
Because of the war.
But what about the blockade? Can't we just end the blockade, or can't they tell the difference between this is a food shipment and this is an arms shipment?
In principle, there is a UN presence in Djibouti across the waterway from Yemen. And in principle, ships that bring food, medicine, etc., could pass by there and be checked by the UN and then be given permission to deliver their goods to Yemen. Early on, the US told Iran not to send any ships to Yemen unless they went through that process. But that process is not working smoothly, partly because Hodeida, one of the main ports, is a battle zone between the Houthis and the other factions. So there's a long queue of ships waiting to get in. Not many are getting in. Once they get in, again, it's a problem of distribution. To some extent, both sides are to blame, but then Aden is not being contested by the Houthis anymore. They were expelled from Aden. There are internal factions, in other words, internecine struggles between factions that are supposedly Hadi factions, but not really. And so Aden is not a safe zone, even though the Houthis are no longer there. And frankly, the GCC countries which helped liberate Aden and the Hadi government are not really in control of Aden and are not using it to demonstrate what they can do when they don't have the Houthis to contend with.
Who's benefiting from this war?
I don't know. It's hard to tell. I suppose if you think that anybody benefits from Yemen being in chaos, it would be Al-Qaeda, which thrives upon chaos. It would be some individuals who are buying and selling arms and smuggled goods in Yemen.
So do you agree with the Trump administration's decision to ramp up America's involvement in Yemen?
Although I agree with the need to fight Al-Qaeda, I don't think right now these stepped up attacks are helping. I was critical, by the way, of the Obama administration as well for the drone attacks, which were very frequent, because the drone attacks and some aerial strikes get some Al-Qaeda operatives every now and then. Maybe occasionally they get a top leader. But they also kill civilians. There's always collateral damage. There are always civilians killed. Given the tribal structure in Yemen and the culture of vengeance, when Americans kill Yemenis, it makes Yemenis angry, and it makes young Yemenis want to join any anti-American organization they can find. So it does not build trust. I would think that the tribal leaders in Yemen don't have a vested interest in Al-Qaeda. They are not ideological to begin with. They have their own cultural norms, their own style of life, their own needs. They could be enticed away from Al-Qaeda if they made Al-Qaeda feel unwelcome in their regions. It would be very hard for Al-Qaeda to operate.
But how does the U.S. do that? How do we influence those leaders?
Through diplomacy and economic assistance.
And will that work? I mean, just given the level of animosity and the death and destruction that this country's been through, I mean, can we really end this war with diplomacy?
Well, look, I mean, this is not working. Whatever it is we're doing now is not working. It's not working for anybody. I mean, it's bad for American interests. Saudis are getting war training, but beyond that, Their southern regions are being attacked right now, are under rocket fire from the Houthis. The chaos in Yemen is not in anybody's interest. And so something needs to be done. It shouldn't be just left like that. And put the humanitarian catastrophe aside and the moral obligation to help. Because you can yell till the cows come home about moral obligation, nobody takes you seriously. But if you say national security interests, then their ears prick up. And so when I present suggestions, I always present them with a U.S. national interest at stake, and here's what you should do. And what should be done to benefit both the U.S. interest and the Yemeni people is to stop this war. The main difficulty is people always say, well, you know, you put down your weapons first, or you remove your blockade,
you go first.
Then I'll do this. So it's like a dance. Nobody wants to take the first step.
Nabil, thanks so much for being on the program.
You're welcome.
This has been the Mimi Geerges Show. You can see all of our programs on WHUT.org and YouTube. Connect with us on Facebook and Twitter and leave me your comments there. Thanks for watching, and I hope you'll join me again next time.
This program was produced by WHUT, Howard University Television, and made possible by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.